Exhilarating.
Exhilaration. It's exhilarating.
Very demanding.
Very fulfilling. A lot of fun.
That's what it feels like to be a snowbird pilot. From the ground, they are awe-inspiring. The Snowbird Aerial Ballet has thrilled millions across North America. They are regarded internationally by their peers as second to none. And in 1990, the Snowbirds celebrated their 20th anniversary. That's what's remarkable. Although formation flying and aerobatics is part of military training, early teams were disbanded almost as fast as they were formed. It began in 1929 with the Siskins, highly skilled aviators even by today's standards. But 3 years later, they were finished. In 1959, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of powered flight in Canada and the 35th anniversary of the RCAF, the Golden Hawks soared skyward on the F-86 Sabrejet, but the team was disbanded in 1964. Then in 1967, Canada's centennial year, it was the Golden Centenaires, flying the Canadian Tudor, a jet trainer. 1967 came to an end, and so did the Golden Centenaires.
But in the process of that year, I suddenly started to realize that Canadians that I was talking to right across the country were saying, don't let happen to the Centenaires what happened to the Golden Hawks.
Colonel Owen Bartley Philp, retired, founder of the Snowbirds, affectionately known to all as OB.
Subsequently, about 18 months later, I was promoted and sent down to Moose Jaw as the base commander. It also happened that some of the airplanes that we flew with the Golden Centenaires were on the base. So it didn't take long for the idea to germinate again that perhaps, just perhaps, we may be able to get another aerobatic team going. I tried it on for size, talking to a lot of the senior airmen of the time. They weren't prepared to support the formation of another aerobatic team, primarily because we were going through the throes of integration at the time.
And we just believe that the principle of a single service is right in the age in which we live, that it reflects the...
However, that didn't stop me from, within my own mandate, forming a formation demonstration team. No aerobatics involved, but a formation demonstration team. The following year, in 1971, we put the team up with 7. We increased the number to 7. In the meantime, I was able to arrange surreptitiously with some of my friends in the technical empire that the rest of the old Centenaire airplanes mysteriously arrived at Moose Jaw. In 1972, the first leader of the Snowbirds, Glenn Younghusband, a man with a lot of initiative and imagination, he designed what he called, with us looking me right straight in the eye, he called it a slanted 360, which really is, in my mind, an aerobatic maneuver. We went along with this and we let it go, and we had the Chief of the Defense Staff, General Sharp, out to the air show at Moose Jaw that year in '72. And I was sitting with the general when he watched the performance, and he looked at me and he said, "Obi," he said, "I thought we weren't supposed to have any aerobatic maneuvers." And I said, "Sir," I said, "that's not an aerobatic maneuver." I said, "That's just a slanted 360. And he said, "It must be something in my vocabulary I've missed." However, as a result of that conversation, the following year for 1973, with General Sharp's support, authority finally came through to have a formation aerobatic team.
OB's persistence and guile made the dream of a Canadian aerobatic team come true. 4 years later, the Snowbirds received permanent status in the Canadian Armed Forces. Who were these Knights of the Sky and their dedicated ground crews that began the 20-year tradition of the Snowbirds?
Well, to begin with, you have to be a very good pilot, and you have to be a very good hands and feet man. I mean, you really got to have a touch, and not all people have that.
Major General Glenn Younghusband, retired. The Snowbirds' first lead, 1971.
there was a dividing line at about 3G, which is, 3 times gravity. And at that point, there's a lot of, every little error is magnified. So in a formation team where you're always up around 3-4G, every tiny little error that you make in flying is magnified, 5-fold, 10-fold.
I think the training that you get with the Snowbirds, and certainly we get about 5 to 6 months of training prior to starting your show season, prepares everybody for that kind of of intense level of flying.
Tom Griffiths, retired, flew solo in 73-74, then team lead 79 and 80.
You like to find an individual who is very self-critical of his own performance and is able to analyze his own mistakes and correct them. But probably more importantly, he's an individual who can listen to others criticize his performance and accept that kind of criticism as constructive criticism and learn from it.
The individual, of course, has to have a good flying record. He has to be inspired for this type of work. He has to have a family that is supportive of what he's going to get into.
Major George Miller, retired, team lead, 1973-74.
Remembering here, close formation, requirements of the Snowbirds is upwards of sometimes 3 feet apart. Well, it's hard to fly 3 feet apart day in and day out. And like a moth to a flame, sometimes the better you get, the closer you want to fly.
As a matter of fact, I probably went after it starting in 1962 when I was an air cadet and saw the Golden Hawks perform over the St. Lawrence River by the Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City.
Major George Howie, retired, flew the box position in 72-73 and returned as team lead in 83-84.
Yes, it was the zenith of my flying career, and it's still up there at the apex. I don't think it'll ever be matched again.
Yeah, you always miss it. It was great. I mean, it's most challenging, most fun flying that one can ever do.
Lieutenant Colonel Yogi Hugabear flew solo in 74-75, flew lead in 85-86, now base operations officer at CFB Moose Jaw.
I think everybody really would like to do that kind of a job because it is extremely demanding, but it's very rewarding, and I probably the only one word I can think of describes it is great.
20 years of precision flying has provided the Snowbirds with a treasury of tradition. The pride, the pressures, the pathos, and the peers, next on the Snowbirds at 20.
There's a fraternity, an ineffable bond between all of us, and mostly between military aviators, especially between our two countries, where we share the same interests, common interests, and same standards. And then
Captain Steve Henderson, a member of the U.S. Air Force Thunderbird Aerobatic Team, and a fan of the Snowbirds.
Oh yeah, they're sensational, and I'm proud to say that I know those guys and that we're able to come up here and visit with them.
That fraternal bond is further enforced by members of the U.S. Navy's Blue Angels. Lieutenant John Foley.
I think we go through the same training, and you're put under the same pressures, both mentally and physically, and it builds a bond. You've experienced the same thing, so it's a closeness that I think I'll treasure the rest of my life.
The American teams, by virtue of their aircraft, fly what might be termed a muscle show: speed, power, and precision. The Snowbirds, by contrast, fly the oldest and slowest jet of all the military formation aerobatic teams. But they also perform the most complex and aesthetically moving of all the shows.
I look at a formation aerobatic team as something that should be choreographed very well. It should show symmetry. It should be sort of a ballet effect. We're as good as anybody else in the world in this particular phase of flying operations. And Canadians like that. I've often said that the Snowbirds now are as much to Canadians as the RCMP musical writers.
And I suppose it's much like an actor or a singer or somebody like that gets up on the stage and puts on a performance. And if you put on a good performance, then you really feel great. I mean, it's a real high, and there's no question about it.
I can just sense the feeling, what's going on. What I feel is the emotion from the crowd.
Captain John Hackett, retired, first Snowbirds commentator and raconteur.
Probably more than the rest of the team, I was the one that heard the crowd go ooh, or ah, or I heard the claps when they did their heart and gave it to the ladies. And I was the one that heard all of that, which most of the team didn't hear because they were up flying. And I still hear that today.
There's a job there to do, and you complete it, you're glad you did it, and as long as you see those birds up there flying information, you're glad they're there, and you're glad you did your job.
Sergeant Doug Marshall, retired, crew chief in '74 and '76.
Our airplanes weren't all modified, so there's lots of times we would have to fly in the other seat in order to run the radios and pull the gear, etc., for the pilot. Because sometimes we'd do a show before we landed.
That meant experiencing a jet pilot's worst fear, the unpredictability of a bird getting sucked into the engine.
I always remember when I had the formation in a complete 9-plane formation, doing an arrival show at Moncton, and I was leading the formation and suddenly had a bird strike when I was completely heading towards the ground with an all 9 aircraft. In fact, my crew chief was with me as Sergeant Marshall at that time.
And we got a bird strike in the right intake of the engine. I felt it on my right foot here because my foot was right against the skin of the aircraft.
Everybody sort of gradually fanned away, and we had a couple of very close calls there as aircraft came pretty close to each other. But
Major Miller, being the pilot that he is, he pulled the aircraft up and landed, and he's declaring an emergency all the way down because it's a commercial airport, and he couldn't get any response from the tower.
It just so happened we were over a very short runway, and we just did one spiral and landed, and it was all over. We never had to eject. We thought of it.
So he went up the steps to talk to the tower operator. Said, why didn't you get my emergency? Oh, tower operator said, we're out in the balcony watching the show, boys.
Some incidents are close calls. Others are just tragic. In 20 years, the Snowbirds have suffered 3 flying fatalities. 2 as a result of mid-air crashes. Another was a structural problem.
There's an element of risk, as there is an element of risk as you walk out your door. The risk appears to be higher, but yet when you're flying in the Snowbirds, you are surrounded by professionals.
George's wife, Joan, speaks for most Snowbirds' wives.
I think the biggest advice that I would give to anybody is to keep the lines of communications open, and that it becomes a very stressful time almost. The guys get so wrapped up in what they're doing that sometimes the families feel like they're being left out. And I think that that is the most important thing, is that you have to be able to talk to each other and to try and understand the other person's position, and that the guys have to understand that the wives are working hard at what they're doing at home.
The 1990 edition of the Snowbirds was a very special group. They carried the mantle of being the 20th anniversary team. How they joined with their predecessors to celebrate that occasion is next on the Snowbirds at 20.
We're only here today because of the dedication and the perseverance that a lot of people had many years ago. In fact, when I was a young student in Moose Jaw back in 1974, the team had just been flying for 3 years.
Major Dan Dempsey, solo pilot 8081, team lead 8990, promoted to lieutenant colonel at the conclusion of the 20th anniversary year.
We are a symbol of national pride, and we really believe in what we're doing. What we're doing is important. Not only for the Canadian Forces, it's important for the country.
Snowbirds, General salute. Salute.
Major Dempsey transferred the team to the new lead, Major Bob Stephan, in October of 1990. That marked the end of one generation of snowbirds and the beginning of another. The old generation, some 340 pilots, ground crew, their spouses and friends, gathered where it all began, CFB Moose Jaw.
We got all the old men in the front here. I'm glad to see that. But we're going to let
They took team pictures from 1971 through to 1990.
On the count of three, everybody smile. 1, 2, 3.
Some found it a little difficult to squeeze into their red flying suits.
I got to breathe. I got to breathe.
They laughed, they joked, they cried. When they started this enterprise, none could have imagined they would be celebrating this occasion. We focused on 7 individuals. Where are they now and what are they doing? Well, George Howie starts each day at the crack of dawn in Victoria. He is still in aviation. First officer with Time Air flying the de Havilland -7.
Airspeed stall and gear warning.
All tested.
Caution and advisory lights.
They were all tested.
Synchrophase.
It is off.
Anti-skid.
Not exactly the snowbirds, but he's flying. That's what's important for him.
When you come back, you'll shut the engine down and you'll get out and
yes, and brief the other guy.
That's okay, perfect.
George Miller is an executive with Spar Aerospace Industries in Ottawa, the people that make the Canada arm for the American Space Shuttle. George is responsible for marketing products like this Brazilian trainer, the Tucano. But he misses those days as a snowbird.
It's a tremendous letdown to just stop. It's like going full throttle in the entertainment business, and all of that comes with it. You're traveling all the time, and it's fully exciting. And all of a sudden, it stops, and it stops dead. And you can get into other flying jobs and sort of thing, and that's interesting. But it's never quite the same thrill.
Tom Griffiths is now president of a gold mine. Really, as far removed as that may be from flying, the snowbirds did prepare him to handle stress.
On several occasions, I've thought back to a couple of events in my time as a snowbird that were very stressful in the air, and they might have been very short-lived, but you get through them. And in retrospect, you think how you handle that situation, and that was a life-and-death situation. And when you put it into perspective with what I'm doing now, when I run into a stressful situation, I very often reflect back to my time as a pilot, and it sort of puts it all into perspective.
Glenn Younghusband, the very first team lead, lives with his wife Jacqueline in the Calgary foothills. He is the environmental officer for the Alberta Energy Company. Now, that may seem far removed from his flying days, but the snowbirds are as close to his heart as ever.
I have a great deal of pride in the snowbirds. When I see them and think that I had the opportunity to lead them at the very beginning, I feel a great feeling of accomplishment and pride.
Come on, Tip, let's go chase some seagulls.
John Hackett and his wife Kate settled in Comox on Vancouver Island. The first snowbird commentator has become an insurance salesman and investment counselor. John and Kate both relish the outdoors.
Is your clock wrong, or is something wrong with our watches? No, he said our clock is right. Exactly right, Bryce. Except for 10 minutes.
Doug Marshall, one of the first crew chiefs, has settled in Kelowna. With 2 other ground crew members, Reg Bach and Fred Broderick, They form an Okanagan chapter of former Snowbirds.
And he was rolling.
And what about the man who started it all, O.B. Philp? He cherished a dream of a formation aerobatic team, and he wanted Canada to share his dream.
I wanted to put together a show that flowed, that was something in front of the public all the time, and when the public got through looking at it, they'd say, "My, wasn't that nice."
O.B. and his wife, Maeve, retired to a picture-perfect sheep farm just outside Victoria.
Ho, ho! Come on! Come on, ho!
Here they come.
Come on. That's it, girls. Come on.
Today, O.B. is an aviation consultant. He and his longtime friend and snowbird photographer, Bill Johnson, have just written the definitive book, The Snowbirds, from the beginning.
Did you ever know that you're my hero? You're everything I wish I could be. I could fly higher than an eagle. For you are the wind beneath my